Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unapologetically Keto. My name is Ralph Peterson, and I could not be more excited today to introduce all of you to my good friend, Mr. Scott Mason. Scott, I know that you have listened to the show, so you know the premise of the show, but just let me put it out for anybody who has not heard my little rant in the beginning, and that is that this show is about no longer hiding, no longer apologizing, no longer being scared to speak up, even though you and I were just going on a tangent. And how I said, I wish I could say, there's some things you just simply, it's better not to say. But this is the show where we take responsibility, we take ownership, we stop apologizing, start trying to figure out what is best for us. And so thank you so much for agreeing to being on this journey with me. I'm so excited to learn from you. So let me give you a quick little introduction to how you and I got introduced. It was through the National Speakers Association. You are a professional speaker, and we are on the board together.
Thanks to
you. And I remember, and this is so wild to me, and it's something that you grapple with when you transform your body and the way that you look, is that there are people who have met me in the last 6 months, and they only know me as how they've met me and seen me in the last 6 months. They have no history. There's no images they've seen. They haven't seen the pictures. They haven't seen Fat Ralph. And that's the experience I had with you. So when you and I were at lunch and I confided in you, I said, I started this thing because I had lost a little bit of weight. I thought I turned this off. I had lost a little bit of weight, and you were like, oh my God, you look so great. What are you doing? And I said, I'm doing keto. And you blew my mind. You go, me too. I've been doing it for 10 years or something. I'm like, what? I had no idea. Yeah. I had no idea. And it was so encouraging because here's the thing. You are one of the first people, you're literally, and I mean this sincerely, and it's so, you come to my life in such an amazing way. The way that you showed up. You are one of the first people who did not ask me to defend or even define what keto was. You defend, you came in with no judgment. Everybody at that time in my life, even today mostly, everybody comes in with judgment. Oh, you shouldn't be doing, oh, that's dangerous. Oh, all of the, and with peace and love. Okay. But what was so special and unique about me bringing it up to you was not me bringing it up, but your response. No judgment, no defending. You were like, you know what? Me too. And this is you have no idea how much that really, really impacted me. It was a really amazing, and I was like, all right, he and I just became best friends.
Dude, I'm so glad you share that. Isn't that amazing how the way we show up around this sort of stuff can build bonds, and you never do know who's been through what and who might be feeling what about whatever. So thank you for sharing that story. And as you know, your own journey has inspired me. And that's why in particular, this is a show that I'm excited to be on and honored as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's a remind. I have a Friday group where it's a bunch of people that I met doing keto with. I took a class from Dr. Boz, Annette Bosworth, and so a bunch of us have stayed in contact, and we are meeting every Friday. Just shooting the breeze, talking about keto, what's working, what's not working, and I've had the opportunity over the last couple of weeks to extend an invitation to new people to join our little group. And I'm happy to do it, but I feel like I always have to say to them, because they're kind of new in keto, I got to go, here, let me just set the stage. What makes this work is none of us are defending keto. Everybody's showing up already drank the Kool-Aid. You already believe. We're not here to convince you. And I just want to reiterate it. That was what was so special about that interaction with you and I, is that's how you showed up for me. You're like, let's talk about it. I drank the Kool-Aid too. Let's get into it. I was like, oh, eureka.
Dude. Thank you so much for sharing that.
So, So let's do this first before we get too far into this, Mr. Mason. Tell me about this guy here.
Oh my God!
Here, hold
Right.
on. I gotta bring you up here. Here you are.
Oh, who was that person?
This is what blew my mind because I never knew you like this.
Yeah.
And first of all,
This.
one of you is a beast. Were you like a bodybuilder? Like what the? Holy, look at the muscles on you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I ended up with severe health problems.
How old
because
were
of
you?
doing-
How old were you?
I was probably in my late 30s at that point.
So how long ago was that?
325 pounds.
Like 20 years ago?
I'm only 26, Ralph.
Oh wow.
It was about a little over 20 years ago.
Yeah, a little over 20 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So your heaviest was
325. I'm 6'1".
yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I was
guy.
a heavy duty weightlifter. I was not there. I don't know that I would have won any bodybuilding contest, but I was strong as all heck. And I ate to maintain that. I didn't care about shredding. I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted to be strong, big. I got what I wanted, but I paid a bigger price than is imaginable. And that's ultimately what led me into the keto journey that has changed my life for the better. And I, in fact, even saved it.
Were you always heavy as a kid? Like, let's talk about like as a growing up. Like, what was that like? Were you?
Yeah, I was a skinny boy. I was 6'1" in teenage years, 155 pounds, 27-inch waist, just tiny. But I grew up in a very, very violent household, and it was explosively violent. And
Like
the
1 minute to
perpetrator-
the next kind of thing?
Yeah, like I would come home from school one day and, I've spoken about this elsewhere. It's something I've dealt with psychologically, but it's where I was at the time. My dad, who was an ex-football player, would just beat the crap out of me. And sometimes I didn't know why, or I would engage with a minor infraction. And then boom, Thor's hammer would come down right on my head. And so I felt very, very defenseless because of that. And then I brought that sense of defenselessness into my day-to-day life at school. And so I was a target for bullies. Now, I always fought back. So the bullies never really saw me as a target, but at home, I just didn't stand a chance. And I remember thinking, I cannot and will not ever let myself, once I am out of this home and into adulthood, be a victim like that. And my solution was to eat and get as big as possible. And I did, but I wasn't dealing with the real problem, and I ended up paying a real price.
Are you the only child?
No, I had a younger sister. I was the oldest child and the only
So
boy,
you're the
though.
oldest. You're the youngest. You know what's interesting that you just said? So I've been doing a lot of work, just trying, because one of the questions, and you just articulated it so beautifully, and I feel like, you probably didn't just know it always. Maybe you've been doing the work too. It sounds like you've been doing the work too. But I want to know why, not how did I get so fat? Why did I get so fat?
Yeah.
Why? Right, and forget the how, forget the overeating. Why did I overeat? And you know what I remember is I'm the youngest of four. And I too had a similar situation where my house was very chaotic. I remember, it's funny, I've told the story before, but I remember in like 4th or 5th grade, we got a lesson about bullies. And they were like, if you're being bullied, bring it up to a school administrator, you can bring it up to a teacher and all that stuff. And I remember going up and I was so excited. I was like, because I was being bullied. And they're like, well, what kid is bullying you? And I was like, my sister. Like, it was at home. I was getting beat up at home. And they're like, yeah, we can't help you with that. We meant at school. Like, but here's the thing. My dad, 6'2", 6'3", 350, 400 pounds, beast of a guy.
Yeah.
The most intimidating guy ever.
Yeah.
But he was the one who hurt me the least. Yeah,
Really?
he would get into knockdown drag out fights with everybody. He would beat the kid, my sisters and my brother, my sister, my brothers, my mom and him would get into a fisticuffs. But I was just kind of came into that because I was the youngest, I was the baby, I was always very, very small, very scrawny. That he scared me the most, but he physically abused me the least of everybody else in the
Wow.
house. But what you said kind of is resonating with me. All I wanted to be was big like him. I never realized
Yeah.
it until recently. I'm trying to put it together. But you're the same way, right? Like you're like, all I want to be is I don't want to be mean. I didn't never wanted to be mean.
Yeah.
I never wanted to beat my sister up because she kept beating me up. I literally just wanted to be so big they wouldn't, because that's what my dad had. My dad was not like a knockdown, drag out fighter. He wasn't. My dad was more of an intellectual. He loved to read, and he would have conversations for days over nonsense, like pollinating a flower, like just the craziest thing. And so many times I saw him in interactions with other people who would, just by the mere size of him, not, you know what I mean? Like my dad would walk in the room and the biggest person in the room would no longer be the biggest person in the room. They were all just like, oh, well, okay, well, he's here. You know what I mean? And I just always wanted to be the biggest person in the room. You don't have to be the meanest or strongest. Sounds like the same thing with you.
Totally. I love knowing that about you and that it sort of played out in that way. It's interesting. Part of what I did as my weightlifting journey proceeded was totally jack myself up on steroids. And so I was.
You took steroids?
Oh, heavy.
Really?
Oh, heavy. Yeah.
Wow.
Massive amounts.
What year?
And,
What year? What are we talking? 90s? Early 90s? Late 80s?
It was, the 90s and the 2000s.
Wow.
Yeah. And so literally I was strong as an ox. For instance, I had a training partner who was the head of fitness for a major gym chain here in New York City. And he also was jacked like me. He was more of a bodybuilder type, but he was still jacked. And we would go into gyms and we would do weights together, and people are not bodybuilding gyms, but regular like corporate gyms or that sort of thing. And people would stop and stare. They would surround where we were and just look. And when it came to that sort of thing, exactly, I wanted to be as huge as possible so that no one would screw around with me or anyone that I cared about. And so if I was walking down the street and someone I loved or someone that I was friends with was in danger, they were not in danger when I was around. I totally enjoyed things like there would be a dark street and a single woman, or an empty subway station, and a single woman would come up to me and say, will you stand by me? Because they knew no one was going to attack her with me standing there. And so I was strong, I was big, I was jacked, but I was eating massive amounts of calories, and I knew that in order to get as strong and big as possible, it was in my interest to carry around a lot of fat. So I had that classic like world's strongest man. Well, you saw the pictures, right? Powerlifter belly, and I had body fat on me, and that was part of the package. Hey, and I could out eat anyone too. And I once read that people who do steroids, but also those who generally are seeking size, have two things in common, and they're men usually. One, growing up in a home where there was violence, which sounds like both of us went through. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, they have rigid gender roles. And I had very much in my mind, this is how a man looks, this is how a man acts, this is how a man behaves, and I'm going to take that all the way. And I did. And so again, no thinking about, well, am I just following social programming? Does anyone think this besides me? Or am I helping myself? Am I degrading all this sort of stuff didn't even come into mind. I don't know how you felt about all that, if that's stuff that you went through, but just sort of like you sort of hinted at earlier, falling into social conditioning, not doing the work, instead of just reacting to the circumstances that you were in, can help lead to these sorts of things if you're the wrong personality type, and heaven knows I was.
I don't, it's weird. And again, I'm trying to figure it all out now. I'm trying to, in retrospect, it's why I'm doing this show. I call it unapologetically keto. It might as well be called, therapy with Ralph. But I don't know that I gave it all that much thought about like gender roles. I mean, I wanted to be just like my dad. There's 3 boys in my house. Me, my 2 brothers, and my dad. So there's a lot of rough housing, all that. So I always kind of just identified like that. But I wanted to be. You know what it is? I didn't want to be scared anymore. I was always scared.
Yeah.
And I thought, and again, not consciously, but I'm just putting it together, I think that adding that size, I no longer had to be scared because, to your point, now people are coming up and like, hey, would you help me? I'm a little scared of this. And I'm like, and I'd act all big and brave, but trust me, if you would have pushed, I don't know that I would have went like, oh, okay. Well, you know what I mean? Like I wasn't like a badass, even though I looked this massive, huge.
Yeah.
I didn't have the mental toughness to be that aggressive. Not till I joined the Marine Corps. Then I got physically tough, or mentally tough.
And that's interesting too. For me, it wasn't until I was diagnosed with extraordinarily high A1C level and then had a series of injuries that I got involved in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a alternative to the weightlifting that I was in. And then that's where I had that experience of learning the mental toughness, of learning what it actually takes to defend yourself and stand up and confront another male, or to just be a presence that's grounded in an inner self-confidence. All of this stuff that we do with our bodies to transform, whether it's subconscious or not, and it sounds like on your level, it was probably at least self-conscious or unconscious. In my case, it probably was both, right? But they're compensatory methods that ultimately are shallow band-aids, and they govern your whole life. And I look back on it, and Ralph, is kind of embarrassing. Like, I spent all this effort and stuff into something that was just a band-aid, and that I didn't even know that I could really back up either.
Yeah.
Ridiculous, at least for me.
I was just hoping nobody ever tested me.
Yeah, and well,
you know what I mean?
Of course they were never going to.
Yeah, that's the, and I think that's why it's so great that you did jiu-jitsu. I just tried my first jiu-jitsu class, but I haven't taken it serious at all. But here's the thing I think that you get from the jiu-jitsu that I got from the Marine Corps, and that is you get tested.
Oh.
Right? Like in the Marine, before I went to the Marine Corps, I mean, I had to lose weight to get in the Marine Corps. Like I had ballooned up. I mean, when I was 18 years old, I was a skinny rail, and everybody commented, would make side comments about how thin I was and how, opposite of manly. I mean, I was the opposite of manly. I was I wanted to be a writer. I mean, I really would spend more time pretending I was somebody else than doing anything physical, hard labor, anything like that. But when I got into the Marine Corps, you're both physically and mentally put to the ringer. And then the most amazing thing happens. You don't die. That's it. I mean, literally. I mean, I know that sounds stupid, but I at first I survived it, right? And then I started to actually thrive in it. And then I started to get really good at it. And I was like, who is this person? And I think that's the big thing, that getting tested is. Yeah. And maybe I wouldn't have been scared when I was 16 and a thin person if I was tested at 16, but I wasn't. I was too coddled.
Yeah.
I was coddled by my mom, and I was afraid of my dad, and I don't know. It's weird.
Well, I have to say, so this isn't seemingly directly related to the conversation, but I'm going to tie it back.
We're going to talk about whatever we want, Scott. It's my show.
Oh, good. Okay, well, then I'll just talk about any old thing.
Whatever we want.
Like it's about any old thing, but it actually is relevant to something, right?
Yeah.
So You mentioned earlier I'm a professional speaker. The topic that I speak about is Greek mythology as a leadership and professional transformation tool.
Great.
And part of what I learn and study and read about on my time in order to bolster that is an understanding of the culture within which the Greek myths arose. And a lot of these cultures, Sparta is a famous example, but a lot of other cultures like that had these rituals where particularly boys would in one way or another be put out into some sort of situation in which they were tested in order to become men. Now, a lot of times the dangers that these boys were in was a little bit over dramatized or overstated, or it seemed like it was all threatening.
Impossible task.
Exactly, but it was all set up. It's sort of like the Tony Robbins walking on the coals. Everyone can do it, although it seems scary. But that being said, from the perspective of the young man that was going through the ritual, they didn't know that this was this life-threatening, terrible thing, and they came back a different person. They came back tough because in that era there were constant wars, there were constant famines, there were constant threats, there were all sorts of things, and not even mentioning things like the monsters that they believed might swoop in at any moment and burn down the whole village. And so you had to be prepared. You couldn't be coddled. I even think about this from a leadership perspective because I know that that's something that you talk about too. One of the things that I found frustrating in a lot of the large institutions that I worked for was that they bred a softness in the leaders because there were certain types that they institutionally coddled, and they didn't have to test or be tested through a lot of hardship in order to then lead people. And then when these institutions come into crisis, the leadership is incapable is impotent. It can't do anything. Well, a way of becoming that is by experiencing exactly what you talk about. And jiu-jitsu, as well as the struggle of dealing with the consequences of my diabetes diagnosis and the dread of the physical degradation that could bring on me, again, forced me to test myself and bring in rigor in a different sort of way so that I couldn't be coddled. And there is something unbelievably empowering internally when you say, I'm that badass that don't need to be coddled. That's why I like entrepreneurship. That's why I like keto, because you know what? Not everyone can do that. You can, and look at you. I can, look at me. The people in your group can, and look at them. Right? That itself is sort of engaging in that badassery and doing it, moving away from this coddle. I've got to have my cupcake. No, you don't. And you can become stronger because of that. Just keeping it real, bro.
No, I so appreciate you, Scott. You're right. I feel like we're right on the same. Maybe you've been here for a long time, but I'm really awakening to this idea, this understanding of why I did get fat and what it was I was. So instead, let me change the question. Instead of asking myself, why did I get so fat? I was asking myself, what was I hiding from? And I was hiding from being weak and feeling insignificant and feeling powerless. And I wasn't, and you know, to your point about the Band-Aid, I wasn't out looking for power and strength. I was looking for size. I was looking for something I could hide behind, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think, though, I wouldn't necessarily, feeling of power and all of that, at least for me, was part of the formula. But that being said, let's face it, size itself was ultimately what I was going for, as the photos indicate. There was muscle there, but no one would say that I was ripped. I wasn't going to stand on a stage and take off my shirt and put on a Speedo and have anyone give me any trophies. And in a way, what the mindset that I had, I don't know if this was impacting you or not. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe this is an individual variation. But to me, the weightlifting was a way to be big and have that size. Fat was part of it, but it was more socially acceptable, particularly as a lawyer, in my opinion, to be of a certain size and have a certain look, to say, oh, it came from weightlifting, or because I'm so strong, than to say that it was just size for its own sake. But at the end of the day, size clearly was the motivator. Otherwise, like I said, I wouldn't have ended up 325 pounds.
You know who Darren Hardy is? He used to be the editor of Success Magazine. He wrote a couple of books. He wrote, I don't know if it was a column that he wrote or if it was, for success, or if it was in one of his books, but he wrote, if you're a manager and you're overweight, and now at the time, I'm a professional manager. It's what I do for a living. It's what I love doing. I love it so much. And he says, if you're a manager and you're overweight, nobody believes you. Nobody trusts that you can get stuff done. I'm 350 pounds when I'm reading this, and I was devastated because I didn't even have, like, to your point, you're like, you really looked like you were at the gym hitting it every day. I looked like I was at Dunkin' Donuts hitting it every day. Like, there was no... You could not have looked at me and thought, he's strong. No. You were like, I hope he doesn't land on me. That's all.
Do you believe that that's true, though?
Yeah.
For men?
What do you mean? What's true?
That what he's saying about people not believing you as a manager if you're a right?
Yeah. I think, and I think it's unfortunate, especially with what I'm understanding now about like GLP-1s and Zepbound and all of that stuff. And how it's a hormone replacement therapy. Now I'm understanding that our bodies, if all things were equal among all bodies, nobody would be obese. Nobody would be super heavy. And the people who are obese and super heavy, it is not because they're lazy. It is not because they have no discipline. Those are not the real reasons. I mean, I thought that about myself, Scott. And I always say this to my friend Devin, because my friend Devin is still struggling with this. My friend Devin still thinks it's his fault that he's heavy. He still thinks it. And I'm trying to talk him out of it. But I haven't been successful. But I'm like, for me, I always thought, like, I am a fat SOB, a lazy, undisciplined, while at the same time, I wrote 9 books.
Right.
At the same time, I started my own company and worked 24/7, 7 days a week, and still do. At the same time, I run 95 marathons. Yeah. And up until 10 months ago, I would have told you that I'm undisciplined, that I just can't get my head, like, not understanding that it's a biological, I'm fighting my own body. My own body's against me.
But let's face it, we live in a culture where people choose to remain uninformed about that, even though there is a lot of psychological and medical data supporting that.
Agreed.
And anyone, well, I assume you're I've seen your content here on YouTube. Yeah. I've seen your content on other platforms. And so you're using these social media platforms to promote and push out your message, which thank God you are.
I'm just trying to share my story.
Well, yeah,
and hoping it resonates.
Yeah, but you're doing that on platforms that themselves also are pushing out people who have no qualifications, have never been in any sort of situation at all, and only have their own lives and their own bodies to judge by, are clearly not looking at any evidence-based thinking, and then pushing out there that this is all about self-discipline, this is all about self-control, this is all about all these other things that they're not. Now, just as an aside, that goes as to just sort of a pet peeve I have around influencer culture, particularly in the health and fitness space. I was flipping through, I was doom scrolling through Instagram. Yes, I confess that I was doing it. Okay, judge me for that. And there was, as an example of what I'm talking about, a incredibly well-built bodybuilder who had, I looked, a significant following on Instagram as a platform, a heck of a lot more than I do. And his posting of that day, his reel that he put up, was why he doesn't believe that dinosaurs existed and why he believed that is all some sort of conspiracy theory that they have put out there to deceive us into all this. Now, what I drew from that was that A, the man is dumb as a rock. But B, right, like if you are thinking this about dinosaurs, what Why should I trust your judgment about the things that you're ostensibly an expert in? Why should I trust your judgment about anything? But the fact is, there's no filter. There's nothing that qualifies someone to be out there putting these messages out there. And so the man who thinks that dinosaurs are all fake has the same weight and leverage to talk about exactly what you do as opposed to you. Right? Someone who has a long history of research and evidence-based thinking for your leadership speaking, as well as a book authorship, as well as your own personal journey, to talk about this stuff with some authority. And it's understandably confusing for people because of that.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate, but I mean, right now where we are, fat people are looked at as lazy, and they're looked at as undisciplined. They're looked at as less than. Yeah. And I remember, and this kind of burns my ass a little bit, I remember a girl telling me about her friend who lost some weight. And the girl who was telling me the story had never had a weight problem her whole life. She's never overeaten. She's never, she not because of discipline, but because her enough level was very low, you know what I mean? Like, she didn't have any metabolic condition where it made her want to overeat or crave food or constantly think about food at all. And her girlfriend did have that. Her girlfriend did have the suffering, this constant food noise, which I can attest to. I understand it. Yeah. And so her girlfriend lost weight, and the skinny girl said, well, I mean, we all knew that once she started seeing a therapist, she started working on her problems. And now the girl is telling me this, that the girl who's heavy, her problem is her emotional condition. The girl is telling me this is an emotional basket case, but she's thin. So because she's thin, she herself and everybody else would look at her and go, she's way more emotionally stable than everybody. What are, like, the judgment, you know what I mean? Like, we're putting qualifications on people based on their size. Scott, it drives me freaking crazy.
It comes out in subtle ways too. A classic, very sad story about this. At least to me, this was very sad. I live, for those who are watching this for the first time, in New York City, in Manhattan. And that means that the bulk of my commute for many years when I worked in offices was on the subway. And many times when I'm on the subway, if I would see an elderly or a disabled person I was sitting, particularly when I was younger, I would, just without thinking, get up and offer them the seat.
Of course.
Another group like that I always would, I don't do this anymore for reasons I'll explain in a minute, but that I would always stand up for was women that were pregnant. Now, one time I was on the subway, I was like that guy, I was huge. So I was taking up more than my fair share of space anyway. But these two women in their early 30s, they look like, came in, both attractive women. They were sort of chatting like they were best friends or maybe office buddies or something. And I looked at one of them and I thought she was pregnant. So I looked at her and I said, would you like to sit down here? And then she said no. And then her friend looked down at her belly, giggled, and was like, oops. That was embarrassing for me.
Yeah.
But you know what? What was really hard about that was that even her own friend used that as an opportunity to ridicule her, right? It could have been something where there was no passing at all. I felt bad about, well, what does it say about social judgments, my own subconscious judgments about people with weight problems, that I felt embarrassed about having said that to her. Right? Like, the whole scenario goes to exactly what you're talking about. Tiny little thing like that. I bet that poor woman went home and she might have cried, or she might have felt insecure. She may have told her boyfriend or someone that she could really trust, and say, you know what? I'm ashamed because this man on the subway thought I was pregnant. And my best friend was sitting there looking at me and giggled the whole time. What a sad little thing to go through. And then there's the overt things that happen, but that's right. It's everywhere. We don't even think about it.
Yeah, and you and I experienced it hundreds of times, and hundreds of times. Yeah. Let's thank you for indulging me. This kind of stuff is
great.
Really interesting to me. Trying to get into the weeds of it, just trying to get into the weeds of it. But let's talk about diabetes. Like, what happened? How old were you? How did you know? Like, what was going on?
Yeah. So I was in my late 30s or maybe very early 40s. And I started to get what's the term for it is venostasis, dark lesion-like things on my legs, and the skin was really thin and the hair stopped growing.
Oh,
And so, right, like I would brush against the edge of my bed and it would start to bleed. It would take a while. And then I was
really?
drinking a lot of water. And then I was urinating a lot, these classic symptoms, but it gradually came up, and it could have been explained by the fact that I was eating so much and I was drinking protein powders, right? Like all of these things had an explanation. But then,
You were still weightlifting or heavy
oh
into that
yeah,
at the same time? Were you still doing
yeah.
steroids?
Yep, up
Okay.
until the very end.
Okay.
And then, more or less, I had a series of incidents in which it became obvious that this was an untenable situation. Like um, my right ankle sort of blew up suddenly out of the blue, and there was no real explanation for it. I had to cancel a vacation that I was going to go on because I'd be admitted in the hospital. They were concerned that there was some congestive heart failure going on there.
Were you
And
experiencing
then
things like gout, gastric reflux, like any of
no,
those things? No.
none of
Okay.
that at all, thank goodness.
Okay.
And then I had a bout of acute pancreatitis. And at that point, then had my A1C taken. I had not the best, not the most attentive primary care physician. And he had me do a A1C reading, and it came back 11.5.
Excuse me a minute. 11.5. I don't know that I know anybody who's ever had an A1C that high. That's
I was like, what does that mean?
that's a lot of sugar in your blood.
Yeah. So they immediately put me on a lot of medicine, and it went down. It went down quickly, but then it took me a while before I was ready to give up the lifestyle that I was living. I had a staff at one point during all of this that took up the entire floor of an office building here in New York City. And I was in my office about to call in the renewals for my prescriptions, and I had laid them all on my desk. And one of my staff members came in, and before she even opened her mouth, she looked at the prescriptions and then like sort of had to disguise her reaction, pretend like she wasn't seeing anything, and then went on with it. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? And that being said, this primary care physician was more just like, take the medicine, and then over time you may have to go into insulin, but take the medicine for now. But then I switched doctors. And at one point he said, you are on all this medicine, your A1C is high, you have this venous stasis on your legs, which, as an aside, I'm one of the rare cases I've heard where it is very significantly faded, enough that a doctor I had later told me that he actually mentioned me in
Oh,
a medical
wow.
school class that he teaches, because the traditional thing is that venous stasis never goes away or gets better. Mine isn't
Oh.
completely gone away, but it's not even really
We might
noticeable.
even say keto for the win on that.
Yeah, that's a total keto victory. But
Wow.
he said, this second doctor said, look, Scott, I was like, I said, I want to get off this medicine. I don't want to get on insulin. You need to tell me what I need to do. And because this isn't working. He's like, yeah, every single patient says that, take the medicine. Every single patient says that, and they don't do anything. And I said, well, I'm not every single patient. He said, I don't know that. Everyone says they're not that patient. And I was like, well, tell me what to do and I'll prove it. And I remember he like put his fist on the desk and he said, if you want to get control of diabetes, you have got to take responsibility for your health. You've got to say, this is on you and I'm going to do it. And I took that, Ralph, as a challenge. I went to Amazon or Walmart or somewhere like that, got a couple of to Barnes and Noble, they still existed at the time, went and bought a couple of diabetes books. And what was really the turning point was reading those. So I knew enough to know I'd had relatives that had passed away or had suffered from severe consequences of diabetes, but I'm adopted, so they weren't blood relatives of mine. But I knew enough to know that like diabetes could make you blind, or diabetes could cause you to lose your fingers or whatever. That I sort of knew, but it was an abstraction that for whatever reason wasn't that spear in the chest. But I decided to read these books, and one of them, it was the Complete Idiot's Guide to Diabetes Type 2, had a chapter in there about the side effects or the ultimate medical outcomes. And I was going to skip that chapter because, like I said, I knew about all of these consequences, but because I'm an English major and would finish a novel no matter what, no matter how boring it was. I just sort of trained myself to do that in college. I was like, I'll pretend I'm a college major and read this. And that chapter changed my life, because one of the things I didn't realize is it said the nerve damage that causes injury to the eye and to the digits can manifest itself as nerve death in the colon, the lower colon, the stomach, and the rectum, meaning that you would lose control of your ability, your bowel movements. And I remember I was like, I am not going to be in my office, on the street, in the gym, anywhere, and excuse me, poop my pants. It's not going to happen. And you know what? If it does, like if it's on the job, I will quit that job in that moment.
I will never go back.
I never work there. Yes. I'll be like, I don't know who you people are. Don't even act like you know me, because I don't know you. But I was like, that cannot happen. And that is what led me to keto. I was like, whatever it takes.
But how did you find keto?
In this book, it basically explained that blood glucose was really an overprocessing of carbs. And what I had, and in particular, carbs that were low in fiber. But even fiber, it explained, had to convert to sugar, as did protein, right? All of that sort of stuff. But that the excess of a lot of these non-fibrous carbs could lead to excessive and chronic elevation of glucose. And so I was eating, chicken breast was my primary protein, but I had like a lot of weight gain powders that you see in the Vitamin Shop or whatever. I would eat massive things of rice, and I would eat 7-8 times a day. And so I was eating these massive quantities of carbohydrates every day that were all doing this. And I had no hesitation about dessert. And I also, my favorite snack was sorbet. And my favorite drink was juice. So I was drinking juice left and right, and sorbet. I was like, oh, this is better than ice cream. It wasn't. And so I was just like turning myself into a sugar machine. I'm surprised I had a pancreas left. I'm surprised I had any blood left at all, that I wasn't just like a sugar zombie. It was ridiculous. And so I was like, okay, let me begin to cut down on these. And then I gradually was moving into keto without consciously understanding what it was. Eventually, I somehow, when I looked at other ways to cut down carbs, found out about that and read about it, consciously adopted it. And I have not, just for those who might be curious about where that ultimately ended up, I have not been on any diabetes medication at all for at least 20 years now.
That's amazing.
Probably more. My A1C has hovered between 5.3 and 5.1 for
That's amazing.
many years. I don't test my blood sugar anymore because my doctor told me to stop. It was a waste of time. And I also have been told I was told by both my cardiologists that I saw about a weird little thing in my heart that I was born with, as well as my primary care physician, to actually remove diabetes from my medical record and say have a history of diabetes. So it really has turned things around. And exercise is part of it, but I'm not as aggressive with cardio exercise as you are. I just walk hour and a half every day. I still lift weights just to keep myself fit, but you're far more aggressive with cardio exercise than I am. It really is diet and keto.
Yeah. So it sounds like, first of all, I wish I had a doctor who was as aggressive with me as it sounds like. Like I wish I had somebody put their fist on the desk,
Yeah.
I had, what sucks is I had when I got out of the Marine Corps, I go to the VA for medical care, and they gave me a female primary, and I didn't want a female primary. I don't know why. I just didn't. I didn't feel comfortable. I still don't feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do? I'm trying to get over myself. So I reached out and I asked if I could have a male primary. And the girl on the phone was super offended. Like, why can't you talk to a girl? Like, a woman, like, she's a doctor, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, forget it. I'll keep. And all that did, as you know, is it made me not go to the doctor.
Totally.
It made me not be honest. It made me, like, it didn't help me at all. And then years later, because irony is such a fun thing, that same doctor sent me a letter, and not just me, but all her male patients, saying that she decided she only wanted to work with females. I was like, how come it's okay for her to make that decision? Anyway,
Right.
I'm the jerk. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I remember coming to her, and again, I'm 350 pounds, and I don't know what to do. And she's like, have you thought about like gastric bypass surgery? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I mean, I would have done anything. I would have totally done gastric bypass surgery. But I remember her, this is like the only time that she ever was like even a little bit confrontational with me. She like turned her computer screen so I could see it, and it looked like a mountain, like a bunch of lines going up, 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 up. She goes, do you see this? And I go, yeah, what's that? She goes, that's your weight over the last 10 years.
Whoa.
I was like, I had never seen that. You know what I mean? Like, how come that wasn't, I mean, obviously I knew it, but I didn't know it. You know what I mean? When you see it in that kind of way, you see she's in a position of authority, a position of, in a medical profession, somebody I trusted in, and as best as I could anyway. And she never was even that harsh with me to go like, look at this. This is ridiculous, Yeah. And it wasn't until I was trying to get her to send me to gastric bypass. She's like, you don't qualify because you have to show your ability to lose weight, and you don't have that. So she sent me to Overeaters Anonymous, and then I was the only one who didn't show up with food. And I was the smallest at 350 pounds, and so I was like, this probably isn't for me. Anyway, I do wish I had somebody like that, the whole pounding on the desk kind of thing.
It did get my attention. It worked. I was super offended at the time, but sometimes, you do need to be offended. I can't help but think about the whole gastric bypass. I had a friend who, when he turned 40, his long-term relationship broke up. His parents died, and I assume he went into some sort of depression. He was already a relatively big man, but he blew up to over 600 pounds.
Holy.
Yeah, and he went into I got gastric bypass surgery. I don't think that he, maybe due to I don't know whether it was because of the doctor or because of the severity of the physical situation that he was in, but he died because of the surgery. And, one of the scary things about being at that size, that although, going back to what we were talking about earlier, you may look strong, or people may not see the physical vulnerability, you are fragile. In a way that can be very, very frightening, and that man's story taught me. And so,
that's terrible. I gotta say though,
story.
To be completely transparent, I would have done anything, and I would have taken any risk. I hated myself.
I think that must have been where he was at too.
I was so disappointed in myself. I so wanted more from me. I so couldn't believe that I couldn't believe that I couldn't control this.
Well, can I ask you, Ralph, did you, because, you talked earlier about the person that we see today isn't the entire life of the person that person has had. And one of the things that is so striking about you, and that you and I have known each other since, I don't know, at least 5 years.
Yeah. So it's a little longer than 5. Yeah.
Between 5 and 10.
Yeah.
And I've never once known you as anything other than joyful and buoyant and energetic. And so because of my Greek myth speaking, when I was on the National Speakers Association board, without you all knowing it, I identified each of you with a Greek god and goddess.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, and yours was Pan, the god of nature, because Pan is outrageous, and he's fun, and he's bouncy, and he's mischievous, and he's wild, but he's also good-natured. All of these sorts of things, and that Pan energy is so fundamental to who you are. Was that coexisting with the part of you that hated yourself? Was it put on, or was it like, how did that even or was the person that you were completely different and Pan had not emerged yet? You were, I don't know, Hades or something like that.
Yeah, no. One of my first loves as a kid was comedy. I remember getting a Steve Martin tape from a of all places. I bought a used Steve Martin tape, Wild and Crazy Guy tape, from a yard sale for 10 cents. I was so enamored with Steve Martin. And then, Eddie Murphy came out, although he kind of ruined my life in 1984 because of my name was Ralph, and he was, oh, way to go there, Ralphie boy. No, but I was always the life of the party. I loved being funny. I loved being the life of the party. I don't know. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what went wrong, but I was always, at the same time, I was always very scared, like if I couldn't be big, I could be funny. Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, nobody wanted to beat up the funny guy. I was the non-threatening, but I really enjoyed comedy. I really enjoyed being fun. I really enjoyed joke telling. I really enjoy conversations. And, it's interesting because there was that dichotomy, because I have people reaching out to me now who knew me at 350 pounds, and they'll hear me talking about it here on the show, and they'll reach out and they'll be like, I can't believe you hated yourself. I can't believe you were struggling. I wish I knew, because the Ralph I knew, even though you were 350 pounds, it was like it never bothered you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of, is that the game we play with ourselves? I don't know. But I never wanted anybody to know how much it bothered me. And at the same time, I always wished those closest to me would rescue me from me. I wish somebody would. I always wanted somebody to come to my rescue. I always wish somebody saw how drunk I got for the 30th day in a row, without taking a day off. I wish somebody saw how much I was eating and how much I was struggling. I always wished somebody was going to rescue. I always thought somebody, like, I remember this one guy who was working for me. He was heavy, but he was a real pretty good drinker, and so was I. And of course, I thought he had a problem. I didn't think I did. It turns out we both did. But I remember on New Year's Day, he was supposed to work, and he worked for me. On New Year's Day, he was supposed to work, and his friend called me and said, I dropped, whatever his name was, off to rehab last night. And so he's not going to be out for 30 days. And I was so jealous that he had a friend like that. I didn't have a friend who would go like, all right, Ralph, this is enough. Come on.
I'm going to share two things with you, Ralph, in response to that. Thank you so much for opening this door and creating the space through this conversation for us to walk into the places. Well, the second one, we'll see how comfortable you are with me walking into it. I'm
Here we
go.
go.
Down anyway, because you can handle it. But anyway, the first thing is this whole idea of wanting someone to rescue you and having your pain being seen. I can totally relate to that. I felt like I couldn't show my pain, and I felt like for a long time that if I did, I would be rejected, or that there would be no one to help me or rescue me, or that the fact that I felt I needed help was itself something to be ashamed of. And so that is so real, and I can completely relate to that. Sometimes I thought, wow, as my physical condition was deteriorating, I also, during the period, I didn't mention this earlier, in which I was starting to have like pancreatitis and this other thing, I started to have physical injuries related to excessive weightlifting, but also the fact that I was diabetic meant that my underlying physical infrastructure was not what it needed to be, especially at that sort of weight and lifting those sorts of weights. Then I'll also share something that is, I'll just share it. As you know, for years, I hosted a podcast centered on psychedelics, and I am proudly an advocate of responsible curated and appropriately managed by someone who knows what the heck they're doing, psychedelic use to deal with trauma. Now, when I started hosting that podcast, I had no experience or knowledge about the psychedelic world at all. And they hired me, the company that I did this for hired me because of that. They wanted a naive person to be exploring this because the audience was a group of people that were naive. But during the time that I was, and actually you will probably remember this, during the time that I was hosting that show, I came down with a sickness that almost ended my life.
I remember.
And it is a mysterious illness. It was very severe. It was sudden, and then it went away, and no one really knows why it went away. No one knows. Right? It was just this whole bizarre, weird thing. And so when I went back to hosting that podcast, the company had regular meetings. They saw the physical condition I was in coming out of that illness, and basically were like, what on earth happened to you? They knew I had been sick, but when they saw me, they were like, oh my God. And so they set up an experience for me to have with a curated, qualified, knows what they're doing, appropriately trained person. And I went to this location that obviously I'm not going to disclose to experience it. And there is a lot of data for those in your audience who may or may not be familiar with this around psilocybin, the substance in magic mushrooms, as a way of dealing with trauma. And one of the things that happened during that experience that I had was that I saw in the left-hand corner of my view of vision a black hole. Now, I was seeking, my intention going into this journey was to quote unquote find my light, the metaphor for what my purpose and my meaning was in this world. And I decided during this experience to go into that black hole. And in that black hole, I felt every bit of pain that I had ever suffered, as if I were living it. Every assault that my father brought on me, every tear that I cried, every day of fear that I had as a child and a teenager coming home, everything. It was all as if I was going through some sort of post-death life review, or I was in it again. And I remember saying to the shaman, I'm feeling every bit of pain. And then I felt every bit of possible pain that I had felt for suppressing it, and for not talking about it, and for not having anyone help me. And I remember thinking, I've lived in denial, both to myself and to those who care about me, about all of the pain that caused me to be the person that ended up needing keto to save my life. And eventually the shaman, after hearing me go down this, and it was going deeper and deeper, and he said, you've got to leave this place. And I was like, no, my light might be at the center of this black hole. He said, you need to leave now. And I did, and I went on to the rest of my journey and had the trauma-reducing, profoundly transformative experience that I, as a psychedelics advocate, and not imposing my views on anyone else, believe that these things are capable of. But understanding and accepting the true depth of that pain, how it really felt, reliving it, and then saying to myself, Scott, you were in denial about it. You lied to yourself about how much it hurt. You lied to yourself how much fear you felt. You lied to everyone, even those who most cared about you the most, about what you were feeling, right? That's sort of what I'm hearing and responding to when you share that story. It can be so easy to say I'm comfortable in this place and that space and being that, this and being the other, rather than truly confronting how bad it must be for us to end up together in our life journeys, all in separate spaces and times, over 300 pounds and obsessed with being big. That's an extreme thing, Ralph. But for me, at least, it was because the pain was that extreme, but the suppression was too.
Yeah, there's this thing about when I look back, and again, even as a kid, like I was always hiding. And you wouldn't think that a 350-pound man can hide, but I swear to you, I was hiding.
Yeah.
You know, I never saw myself as big as I see myself in retrospect. You know, I have Fat Ralph behind me here. You know, can't quite see all of him, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
My son is on my arm in that picture. He's graduating 8th grade. He's 13. And
Congratulations.
I remember being embarrassed for him. That I was his dad. That his dad looked like that.
How about when you cross the 40-inch waist threshold?
My max was 48. I was 48. That's 4 feet around. Holy shoot.
Yeah,
Darn.
mine was 46. So you beat me by a grand 2 inches.
I got you by
Wow.
25 pounds too. So
Whoa.
and I'm only 6 foot tall, so I'm even shorter than you. Oh man. You know, there's one other picture I wanted to share. Oh, well, let me see. Where are you here? Let me pull
Norway.
you up here. Hold on. There you are.
Yeah.
Tell me about this guy.
That's my longtime spouse, David Pavlovsky, who's been with me through all of this 28 years and has supported me and loved me no matter what. What a gift.
What a gift indeed.
What a gift.
This must be where you were your heaviest, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. No judgment ever. No. Right. He really is someone I always say, as I've come to terms with my own weaknesses and vulnerability and accept that as part of who I am. I always tell you, you're the guardian of my soul, David.
Yeah.
And you've stood by me and you've protected my dignity. You've protected me when I was able to face these fears, from the self-destructiveness that can come from really looking at your life in the mirror and diving into that pain. You know, love and support, having those people that'll be there for you. At least for me, it's been an integral part of this journey. People do it alone. I don't know if I could have. By the way, he used to own a restaurant. When I was eating a lot, he cooked a lot and he cooked well, but there has been no one who adapted more quickly and has been more creative and brought more love into supporting a keto diet than the man who runs our kitchen like a restaurant.
You know, that's what I was going to ask you too. Like,
Yeah.
well, you know, none of us are a me, right? We're all a we.
Yeah.
And so, how was that for him when you were
I think
changing your
yeah.
diet? Was he right on board with you the whole time?
First of all, his concern was like he didn't like me being in the hospital. He didn't like me being sick, and he certainly didn't like the prospect of me losing my leg or going blind. And he also, I think, was not particularly charmed by the idea. I mean, I remember him telling me he grew up in rural Pennsylvania. There's a lot of elderly people in the community that he grew up in, and there was a lot of caretaking that he had to do as a child with a lot of these early relatives, and he did not seek. Caretaking may be part of our journey. That's part of being together. You don't know, but I don't know. In fact, I know for a fact he was not in the least bit enamored with the idea of having to caretake someone who was driving themselves into that situation. And so right, like, you know, I don't want to be a caretaker for no reason, Scott. If you get hit by a car and no one can help it, that's life.
Yeah.
If it's because, right, you just have this desire to be big and intimidate people and are eating too much rice and beans, well, you know, don't put me through that, please. And so, you know, that also goes as to, and, you know, when you say that we're a we, there can be, it's embarrassing to admit, at least for me, but there can be a narcissism also associated with indulging in the behaviors that put ourselves at risk because other people do care. Other people, I mean, imagine if I had had a heart attack, or if I had gone into some sort of diabetic coma, or if anything could have happened, and there he would have been in his 40s, having built his whole life around someone, committed to loving someone, and having to face the world alone. What a cruel, selfish thing for me to do. And part of what I've had to also take ownership of is the commitment that I have, feeling like, oh, if I'm big and strong, no one will F with me and I'll be a man and all that sort of stuff. Well, what about the part of being a man that means you protect those that you care about, or that you're there for them, or that you, again, have that inner strength so that you can survive and not just take love, but be able to fully give it for a long time. And that was something I was falling down on in a big, big way. Just keeping it real.
I have nothing. I don't know what to say. I mean, I
like you with your kid on your shoulder.
I know. You're so right. You're so right. Like, I spend, it's like that narcissism, that wanting it to be about me, the wanting to be seen, the wanting to be understood, the wanting to be heard. And admittedly, even at the expense of others who I claim to love, who I claim to respect, who I claim to care for. Man, it's tough, right?
I don't look back with shame upon my journey. That's my journey. And for whatever reason, that's what life either brought me or what I chose when I came down into this world to experience as part of my life. And I generally don't believe in shame as a mode of being. Over the years, I've come to really be a lot. I like to think I've been successful at eradicating shame in myself and about my life from my inner vocabulary or way of thinking. But where I do struggle with shame is when I think about what I put David through going through all this. And there are many times, sometimes I'll just randomly think about it. Or he'll make, every Sunday, he loves to make me an omelet that's specially made to my taste. And we use lavash bread instead of bread on the side because it's, a whole slice of that has like 9 grams of carbs. Right? It's just inconsequential for all intents and purposes. And he's been doing that for years, and he gets so much joy out of bringing me this tasty thing that is healthy. And I think about all of what could have been and how someone who's that giving might have received that as a reward. And that's where I struggle with shame today, because the hurt that we cause others is a different sort of thing to process than the hurt that we may cause ourselves, or the feelings that we may have because of our own actions and how they impact us inside, or how they impact others in ways that don't necessarily hurt them. But those that we love are being hurt, even if it's experiencing fear or having to go to the hospital for no reason and worrying, are you going to be okay? When I had that illness a few years ago that I told you about, that was something where I don't feel shame. I mean, it was traumatizing for him because he thought, well, I was going to die. But that wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
This other stuff that was totally on my ass.
Yeah.
Work is ongoing. That's an area I'm working on. And he's never made me feel ashamed. He's like, that's part of the journey. None of us are perfect. I love you as you are, and I love you for the journey, and I love for the fact that you went on this. That's nice, but I still feel embarrassed.
Yeah. Yeah. I too want to look back at Fat Ralph with love and with admiration and with respect and with understanding and forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I still struggle with it. I'm not fully there. I still have my moments where I still hate Fat Ralph. I wish I didn't have to go through that. And I'm cognizant of the that whole modus operandi of you wouldn't be who you are if you didn't go through that. Well, there's only so much trauma, at some point, your cup runneth over and it makes no difference. Like you turn the friggin' sink off, terrible analogy. But you just reminded me of one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. So I was, I don't know, late teens, early 20s. I don't know, whenever the Roseanne show was on. And I was very interested in trying to figure out how to write a sitcom. And so, I was just a storyteller. So I'm really into the writing of how to write like a Roseanne show or whatever. But I'm only saying that because the Roseanne show ended, and the last couple of episodes of the Roseanne show, or even the last season, was about how Dan, her husband, cheated on her.
Yeah.
And with another woman, and he left her for another woman, and she won the lottery, and it was like all this weird and
surreal. I remember that.
Yeah,
right?
it was very like I didn't get the inside joke until the end. The last episode, she's in the basement and she's writing about Dan had a heart attack, and she felt like it was him cheating on her. And so that whole season, the story arc of him cheating on her and moving out with another woman, it was his addiction to food. It was him putting himself in a situation where he did cheat on her. He did leave her.
Wow.
And that's what you just kind of reminded me of. And I'm like, if you need a reason to start exploring keto, dieting, GLP-1s, mushrooms, whatever, look at those closest to you.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, do you really love them? Because if
Right.
you do, then it's going to require you to love you too.
Yeah.
Because you can't be fully there for them if you can't be fully there for you.
It's the beauty of love. It's the horror and the pain of it too. So many people through that love. Wow, that Roseanne's story. I'm glad you reminded all of us about that, right? That was about the devastation of love.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Actually, thank you for having me, Ralph. You're an incredible conversationalist and an absolute top tier podcaster, and a true keto hero.
It saved my life. It sounds like it saved your life.
Without so much as a single doubt.
And I really appreciate you as a friend.
Thank you. You too, my brother.
We're going to get out of here. See you guys later.